Okay, I'm back with the second half of chapter 1 of Night, page 8. Spring 1944. Splendid news from the Russian front. There could no longer be any doubt. Germany would be defeated. It was only a matter of time, months or weeks perhaps. The trees were in bloom. It was a year like so many others. It was spring. Its engagements, its weddings, and its births. The people were saying the Red Army is advancing with giant strides. Hitler will not be able to harm us, even if he wants to. Yes, we even doubted his resolve to exterminate us. Annihilate an entire people, wipe out a population dispersed throughout so many nations, so many millions of people. By what means? In the middle of the 20th century? And thus my elders concerned themselves with all manner of things, strategy, diplomacy, politics, and Zionism, but not with their own fate. Even Moshe the beetle had fallen silent. He was weary of talking. He would drift through synagogue or through streets, hunched over, eyes cast down, avoiding people's gaze. In those days, it was still possible to buy immigration certificates to Palestine. I had asked my father to sell everything, to liquidate everything, and to leave. I am too old, my son, he answered. Too old to start a new life. Too old to start from scratch in some distant land. Budapest radio announced that the fascist party had seized power. The regent Miklos Horthy was forced to ask a leader of the pro-Nazi Nyla's party to form a new government. Yet we still were not worried. Of course, we had heard of the fascists, but it was all in the abstract. It meant nothing to us that it more than a change of ministry. The next day brought really disquieting news. German troops had penetrated Hungarian territory with the government's approval. Finally, people began to worry in earnest. One of my friends, Moshe Chaim Berkowitz, returned from the capital for Passover and told us the Jews of Budapest live in an atmosphere of fear and terror. Anti-Semitist acts take place every day in the streets, on the trains. The fascists attack Jewish stores, synagogues. The situation has become very serious. The news spread through Sighet like wildflower. Soon that was all the people talked about, but not for long. Optimism soon revived. The Germans will not come this far. They will stay in Budapest for strategic reasons, for political reasons. In less than 3 days, German army vehicles made their appearance in our streets. Anguish. German soldiers with their steel helmets and their death's head emblem. Still, our impressions of the Germans were rather reassuring. The officers were billeted in private homes, even in Jewish homes. Their attitude toward their hosts was distant but polite. They never demanded the impossible, made no offensive remarks, and sometimes even smiled at the lady of the house. A German officer lodged in the Kahn's home across the street from us. We were told he was a charming young man, calm, likable, and polite. 3 days after he moved in, he brought Mrs. Kahn a box of chocolates. What a nice guy. That wasn't in the book. The optimists were jubilant. Well, what did we tell you? You wouldn't believe us. There are your Germans. What do you say now? Where is their famous cruelty? The Germans were already in our town. The fascists were already in power. The verdict was already out, and the Jews of Sighet were still smiling. The 8 days of Passover. The weather was sublime. My mother was busy in the kitchen. The synagogues were no longer open. People gathered in private homes. No need to provoke the Germans. Almost every rabbi's home became a house of prayer. We drank, we ate, we sang. The Bible commands us to rejoice during the 8 days of celebration, but our hearts were not in it. We wished the holiday would end so that as not to have to pretend. On the 7th day of Passover, the curtain finally rose. The Germans arrested the leaders of the Jewish community. From that moment on, everything happened very quickly. The race towards death had begun. First edict. Jews were prohibited from leaving their residences for 3 days under penalty of death. Moshe the beadle came running to our house. "I warned you," he shouted, and left without waiting for a response. The same day, the Hungarian police burst into every Jewish home in town. A Jew was henceforth forbidden to own gold. A Jew was henceforth forbidden to own gold, jewelry, or any valuables. Everything had to be handed over to the authorities under penalty of death. My father went down to the cellar and buried our savings. As for my mother, she went on tending to the many chores in the house. Sometimes she would stop and gaze at us in silence. 3 days later, a new decree. Every Jew had to wear a yellow star. Some prominent members of the community came to consult with my father, who had connections with the upper levels of the Hungarian police. They wanted to know what he thought of the situation. My father's view was that it was not all bleak, or perhaps he just did not want to discourage the others, to throw salt on their wounds. The yellow star? So what? It's not lethal. Poor father. Of what then did you die? But new edicts were already being issued. We no longer had the right to frequent restaurants or cafes, to travel by rail, meaning railroad, to attend synagogues, or to be on the streets after 6 o'clock in the evening. Then came the ghettos.